Thank you for coming back. We were thinking with Caroline that maybe to launch the roundtable, we could ask you any reactions to the small survey that we made at the beginning of the day. You may remember that we've asked 3 very short questions to the audience, to the participants online and on site, about are there some low-risk drinking guidelines in your country? Are they promoted? I will remind you of the main results so that you can react if you want to these results. Most of the respondents, 77%, told us that they do have guidelines on alcohol in their country. 14% didn't know if there were guidelines in their country, which I find quite striking. And 55% told us that these guidelines were promoted when they existed in their countries. What do you think of that? Do you have any reaction to that? Who wants to begin? Catherine, thank you.
I can start. I'm going to react to the way the question was phrased, though, because I tried to answer it and I found it very difficult because, you could only tick one box, first of all. And it's very interesting, at least in Canada now, almost 2 years now after the release, to see how they are being promoted. And it works in mysterious ways. It can happen in clinical settings with doctors. It can happen through promotional campaigns, but that's the most costly of it all. And sometimes there's limited budget for that. Through the media, certainly, although that's not necessarily always voluntary, but at least now in Canada, any media article that will come out about alcohol kinds of naturally then leads toward the discussion about the guidelines that rise to the top again. So it's very interesting to see it popping everywhere. So yeah.
Yeah, I was very struck, but I think it was about 4% of people said the press and journalists promote the guidelines. But as Catherine says, as we found in our media review, actually that just kind of incidental background mentioning of guidelines is probably one of the most prominent ways they are communicated alongside product labels. So I think we should probably not underplay that.
And if you think of social... Oh, yeah, you first, and then...
I think we need an institution listed that and check very often. And I know that the International Center for Alcohol Policy, maybe it has changed name, but the lobby, they do it. And they joke because the numbers are different for each country. So maybe, I don't know if WHO, you don't do it. List all the countries who have low risk drinking guidelines. Maybe researchers have done it, I don't know. We should find it. Look after it.
When we talk about the promotion of the guidelines, social media is now everywhere present, in particular for children and young people. They are on social media all the time. Has that changed the way how we are promoting these messages to the public? And do you feel that national public health institutes like Santé Publique France and other institutes, are we on top of that? And are we using that medium sufficiently effectively to further disseminate these low-risk drinking guidelines, in your view?
I think we do. I think that there's no public health agency in the world right now that would promote something without having social media in its mind and making sure that whatever product they develop can be shared on social media. That being said, no matter how well they do that, let's not forget that it's going to be in a sea of other type of promotional material coming from the profit-seeking perspective. And so, we're going to be drowned into all of that contrary material. So honestly, until there's, one of the best buy that is followed, meaning, the limiting or restriction of alcohol marketing, it does not really matter how well we do it. It does matter how well we do it, but its effect will be limited given the opposing side.
I'm not a marketing person, but there is no campaign without social media now. So it's it's not social media something apart. It's always with the rest. So I don't know, maybe somebody in the audience can talk about it better than me.
Yes, Emily wanted to share something. Can we hear her? I think it's okay, Emily. Can you try?
Yes. Hear me now?
Perfect.
Yes. Yes, I was just going to add to that as you've noted, social media is a central way to disseminate any public health messages today. It does present unique challenges, particularly with the length of the messages that can be used. And so we know that often the way that ads are now purchased on social media, they will be in a skippable format where people can skip forward and not have to watch the whole ad. And that makes it really important to consider the design of the advertisement so that you have the most critical information right in those first kind of 5, 6, 7 seconds before they have the opportunity to skip forward. So there's just some really unique challenges that come with using social media and thinking about the design of campaign messages.
Can I just continue on that?
Of course.
I totally agree with that. And I think that if we look at the most recent campaign that was developed by WHO, the Reframe campaign, we certainly did go for something like that by ensuring that, we use plain language, that all those messages were clearly understood, just a few words in a language that is accessible. So really using those people-centered approach to ensure that the message is communicated very well. That is, of course, absolutely essential if we want to have a chance at reaching people. But we see that, we are getting better and better at it.
We have a suggestion from José Miguel. He's from our online participants, and he is saying, what about the role model of politicians, for example, or GPs? Can they contribute something to this, to the campaign, and should they not better point out that people should consume no alcohol? How can we use, or influencers, but particular GPs or politicians?
It's not an easy question.
No, it's not an easy question.
I mean, one of the challenges with this is, do the politicians actually agree with the message? I mean, one of the problems we've had in the UK, at least until earlier this year, is we've had successive governments who are not particularly supportive of public health interventions. This kind of intervention might be slightly more in favour, something they're in favour of, because it is very kind of individual-led. It's not about regulation of industry. But even then, kind of nannying people is a real barrier to get over. One of the other challenges with using GPs, at least in the UK system as well, is they're really under pressure. And they don't have time within their workload necessarily to ask about smoking, to ask about diet, to ask about drinking. All of these things are time, and time is essentially money for them. And it's been quite hard to get brief interventions or screening for heavy drinking into GP practice in the UK for that reason. And when GPs were offered more money to do that, they did do it. But when budgets became tighter and that money was reduced again, that's the wrong way. When they were offered more money, they continued doing what they were doing before. When the money was taken away again, they did less. So giving more money doesn't improve things, but taking money away makes it worse. Mm-hmm. So I think there are real barriers to getting this kind of thing into general practice.
I think that beyond whether GPs or no GPs or ministers, I think what's really important at the moment is that the public health community comes out as united. And I know that in our daily job right now, we're spending a lot of time and resources and money into convening all of those stakeholders, partners together, so that when we speak about alcohol, and the harms it causes, it does not look like just one little group of people that talk about it, but that everyone is united. Just like the profit-seeking perspective always comes out as a united front. And that is really, really key. We've been doing it now in connection with the release of the alcohol policy playbook. We've been doing it with the communication campaign. But I think that there's a message here for all of us that we need, whenever we have a resource, a document, a publication, an event coming out, to get better at convening as many people as possible, because together we stand stronger.
Mm-hmm. We have a question online, and please don't hesitate to ask questions online with the Q&A section. We also can take some questions, of course. Here we have a microphone which is circulating around among us. So I will take this one. Guidelines seem to target drinkers, yet harmful effects of alcohol are known to be disproportionately affecting lower socioeconomic subgroups, despite their average lower consumption. How can we effectively reach those most at risk of harmful consequences?
I mean, this is one of the trickiest points, and it often doesn't get addressed in the debates about guidelines because no one really wants to go down the path of saying that people from poorer backgrounds can drink less than people from richer backgrounds. Although if you take the kind of pure epidemiological approach that Catherine set out, that would be the logical interpretation of that. And we actually do it for men and women. We're quite happy to tell women to drink less, but we're not happy to tell poorer people to drink less. And obviously there are good reasons for that. Or, well, maybe not for the gender side, but there's definitely good reasons why we don't do it for socioeconomic status. The other point here is that people from more deprived backgrounds are less able to enact behaviour change on their own. They have more stresses in their lives. They live in more constrained circumstances. We know behaviour change interventions don't work as well with those groups. We need other interventions to work with those groups. We know, for example, that minimum unit pricing for alcohol is much more effective in low-income groups. General price increases are. I don't know the evidence as well on inequalities and other of the safer interventions, but I would suspect that those kind of more regulatory interventions are more effective for for lower-income groups. And we need to kind of confront those difficult political arguments if we want to reduce the harms in the groups who are most at risk.
Maybe our SRB represented here by John Newton says that we should talk not only about alcohol, but more broadly, because those populations have other problems, and then we must tackle at the same time, not only alcohol.
It's very much also enabling of the environments. So make sure that the environments in which people are living do not encourage access to buy alcohol as well. So I find it also very important. So are there some questions from the room as well? I saw 2 hands up. 3 hands up. Let's first start with the gentleman here. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Hello. Thank you, Pierre. So I'm John Newton. I'm the président du Conseil scientifique pour Santé publique France. It's a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed the morning. And my question was going to be the same, so I'll change it slightly. Do you have any evidence of the impact of low-risk guidelines on health inequalities? I mean, there's reason to think that they might not be very effective, but do you have any data to suggest what the impact is on health inequalities?
I suggest we take all 3 questions first, and then I give the floor to you to see to which one you want to respond.
So and we don't forget Emily, who is there. Don't hesitate to raise your hand if you want to interact as well.
So I introduce myself again, Florence Bertelletti from Eurocare. Some of you have mentioned a background of what you presented in which was embedded in research in tobacco control. And what my question is here, I think if we start from the premise that alcohol is the #1 carcinogen, just as tobacco, I think the overall frame should change in a sense that the key message is alcohol less is better, but perhaps we should say alcohol less is better, none is best, as a key message. The second thing is none of the thing we are doing will work in the avoidance of embedding it in comprehensive strategies to alcohol policies. And the third thing is here we are, I think, so it needs to be embedded in a call for comprehensive strategies, which is exactly what the WHO is calling. But the third thing is, I think the elephant in the room is the fact that we are still in a sea of contradicting messages that Catherine mentioned, that in fact the public is still subjected to, and where the profit or health farming industry that we know very well have no problem pushing things which are not at all evidence-based. So my question to you all is, why are we not starting at this stage to also say that actually possibly alcohol less is better, but none is best, which would be in line with the low drinking guideline, which clearly say in the Canadian that actually the best is not to drink at all. Mm-hmm. I think we should start saying this because alcohol is the number one carcinogen.
Thank you. And then the third question.
Gert-Jan Storm, we are associated with the Biodiversity Research Network Biodiversa Plus. I'm here to learn about the experiences I've been listening to, and people-centered focus and a broader approach to beyond alcohol to behavioral change could be issues to share in the context of analytical work of Earth system boundaries and just transition, focusing on global systemic risks, of which antimicrobial resistance, avian flu, and COVID-19. So it's not a question, rather a suggestion that we could listen more to the health community and what we have to offer. We have a structured approach in this initiative responsible for European biodiversity partnership to interact with you in a systemic way.
Thanks a lot, sir. So 3 questions. So one on effectiveness on health inequalities. The second one, should we not have the slogan like no alcohol is best? I suggest a debate about the political and commercial terms of health. We do that in the afternoon after lunch. And the third question is, shouldn't we work together with other parts of public health that also want to see, let's say, behavior change and how we can address it in some more systemic ways? So, Flois, yours.
On social inequalities, it's not a real answer, but there is a study that I didn't put in the slides, but I could show it. People with higher education drink more than people with middle education and people with low education. And same for revenues, money, same. So when you measure when you look at the indicator that we have created, people drinking more all over the levels. So you see that people less educated and who have less money, they are less numerous and drinking over the lower drinking guidelines. But this is not the answer of the effectiveness. It's only reflecting that they drink less.
The evidence from our study was pretty clear on socioeconomic status. There's a big gap in knowledge of the guidelines, and that gap didn't close at all. I don't know if, Emily, did you have any subgroup effects in any of your studies? Did you look at any of those things?
We didn't look at socioeconomic status or any of those indicators. We did look at high risk and low risk drinkers, which was people drinking above or below the guidelines, and we found very similar effects across those 2 groups. But no, I'm not aware of kind of work in this area that's looked at differences by socioeconomic
Yeah, and I think this is the case for a lot of
status.
Sorry, Emily. I think this is the case for a lot of evaluation studies, that they're still not looking at inequality effects, and we probably do need to do more of that.
I can maybe add that the mortality risk of dying from alcohol is bigger in lower socioeconomic groups, and the care that people receive, the people that have alcohol problems, is less effective or less there than people from higher socioeconomic groups. Maybe you have more information on that. Sorry, we need a microphone here for Karina.
Online participants.
Yes.
That can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
just on the available evidence, we've been really working closely with the several countries, especially the Baltic countries, where we have the opportunity to look at what we call natural experiments. So not in the sense of what would be the impact of low-risk drinking guidelines, but overall policies and those WHO best buys. And we do have clear evidence of the impact in reducing inequalities once you implement those policies. So we haven't looked at the very precise topic of low-risk drinking guidelines, but the evidence is very clear on the impact that it has when you implement those policies in reducing inequalities and the value that it brings at the national level. Thank you.
And I guess the other thing to say, and maybe coming to the third question a little bit, is we know that a lot of the things that are driving these inequalities are not the health-related behaviours per se, but what sometimes get called the causes of the causes. So the economic structures of society, poor quality housing, poor living environments, poor quality work, the mental health stresses that leave then your body vulnerable to physical harms. All of these kind of things are kind of playing into these inequalities. And yes, we need to tackle alcohol, we need to tackle smoking, diet, physical activity, but we do also need to look at the conditions in which people are living as well.
Perhaps I could go to the second question more, the one that Florence posed. I'll wear two hats here. I'll first start answering with my former CCSA hat and then go on to WHO. When it comes to, the reason why this time around we didn't go for strict numbers, but for something that was more qualitative, such as this less is better, came out of our public consultations with people and this Cochrane review that we also commissioned on people's attitudes toward guidelines. And people were very clear in their message that they were like, don't patronize us, don't tell us what to do, we don't want numbers, we're adults, we're gonna make our own decision. We all know that this is pretty unique to alcohol. So they were afraid of what we were going to be telling them, so they don't want us to. But nonetheless, they're saying, let us make that decision. So that, of course, came into this decision of designing this continuum of risk, which was more qualitative in its nature. But throughout the process, we also looked at, for example, food guides around the world. And we are moving away from numerical advice and more those qualitative message. And once we've entered that realm, well, maybe that this tells me that it's time to have, to convene all European countries and see if we can start to have a discussions about what would be a common European message toward alcohol, for epidemiological reasons, statistical reason, clear modeling from country to country, it will always differ a little bit. But a unified message, maybe we are now ready to have that conversation, given all the evidence that is now pointing toward this no safe level.
On this question of, oh, sorry.
No, you can go, John, and then we'll have Emily.
Oh, go, Emily, I've spoken lots. Emily, go first.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Emily.
To that.
Yeah.
But I think one of the barriers to people accepting both the guidelines and then even stronger messages about none is best is the lack of awareness about the serious harms caused by alcohol. So we definitely see this in Australian data, and I'm sure it's the case in many other countries too, that most people are not aware that alcohol causes, 7 or 8 different types of cancer, as well as heart disease and stroke and, so many of those other serious conditions. So I think that was something that really prompted our research or drove that, was this idea if we have to raise awareness of the risks before we can get greater acceptance or any motivation to comply with the guidelines and kind of acceptance of that information. So I just wanted to add that.
On this question of should we be telling people that zero is, well, let's start with the less is better. I mean, that definitely, I think that is a unified message that everyone can get behind. The question is, what guideline level do we set? And should we even have a guideline level or something more like a continuum? This question of is nothing best, I think is a really tricky one to get into. It raises questions about what we're actually trying to achieve with alcohol policy. Are we trying to get to a point like a tobacco-free world, of an alcohol-free world? Is that where we want to go with alcohol? Is it the right place to go, given that, yes, alcohol does cause a lot of harm, but it isn't as harmful at the individual level as tobacco. It's not as addictive at the individual level at tobacco in the ways that most people consume it. So there are really tricky questions to get into as well. And there's a piece that's coming out in Addiction Journal soon talking about the fact that public health actors don't talk enough about the role of pleasure. And again, there's been debate for tobacco about whether tobacco actually gives people any pleasure. Maybe it's just the addictive effects. I don't know the science on that. But what is very clear is that people get pleasure from drinking. And we do need to take that into account, because lots of things we do in life are risky. Lots of things that we don't worry about, particularly in public health, are risky. But we just accept them because they're pleasurable or they're necessary. Alcohol could fall into that category. The problem is that some people drink at much higher levels. So I guess what I'm trying to get towards is, if we're going to have that message that zero is best, we do need to think about the deeper implications of that. And I think there's a much bigger debate to have before we can kind of agree as a community that is the right message.
I'd like to come back to the comment that Emily made about, people need to be aware before we can, maybe more promote the guideline. I think it's a question of the egg and the chicken here, because my experience has definitely been that while we had been saying for years all the types of harms that alcohol caused, no one was really listening until we came out with this continuum of risk, and that people realized that over 2 drinks per week, they were starting to enter a moderate risk level. And then they went, hold on, why is that? And then that opened the gate to have all these conversations about the harms that cause alcohol. Alcohol causes cancer. People were shocked. There were so many people that were completely unaware of that. And of course, after years of campaign regarding the benefits of alcohol for the hearts, that's of course the first thing that people went back to. So anyway, I think that there's not necessarily a sequence here. It's circular, and we need both.
I do want to pick up an issue that we touched upon earlier during the presentations, and what you also referred to. It's about the normalization. Oh, it's so normal. Alcohol is part of every party, everyday's pleasures, and this is obviously also very much pushed by industry. You talked about changing the social norm. So how do we changing the social norm? And if we have a very strong message like no alcohol is the best, we've seen it with tobacco as well, at least it shifts a bit more into the normalization of it, that it is not so normal to have alcohol. So shouldn't we not be a bit more stronger in our messages, rather than say everyone, oh, it's fine to drink 10 glasses a week or 2 per day, go ahead, which is in a way reinforcing it's all part of our lives.
The norm is already changing. As you see, the alcohol industry is beginning to do non-alcohol drinks. And well, they buy the small companies who are starting it. And there are more and more influencers who do blogs on the subject. So we should maybe help those persons, because they are leading a new trend. Maybe it's a small trend, but we have to help them.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other strand that's really changing is we've seen this huge decline in youth drinking over the last 20 years in many high-income countries. Not everyone, but in most places. And it does seem that that's not just in adolescents. It is translating into young adults as well. And that's definitely very visible in the UK. And we do need to think about, well, what does that mean for norms in various aspects of society as those young adults move through the life course and become a bigger chunk of a population? In a country like the UK that has huge numbers of pubs, we're already seeing pubs closing, not just because of this, other reasons as well. But those pubs are simply going to be used less because people aren't drinking as much. And yes, alcohol-free drinks are part of that story as well. The other thing I think was worth just thinking about is a lot of the policies we talk about relating to alcohol are about denormalizing drinking, making drinking less attractive, less appealing. And that's absolutely the right thing to do. We don't talk a lot about normalizing non-drinking. There's a few things happening now that are doing that. So alcohol-free drinks are one. Dry January in the UK, and I'm sure campaigns around the world also talk about that a lot. But I don't think we do talk enough about normalizing the idea of non-drinking or light drinking. We focus a lot just on denormalizing drinking.
You're absolutely right. And one turning point in promoting Canada's guidance on alcohol and health also came out of, after doing tens and dozens and hundreds of interviews. And it was always going back to this, journalists were pushing back on this idea that we were taking away something from people, right? We're making it less affordable or less accessible, or we're taking away the fun. And at that point, we switched the message and worked more on what is it that we are offering, And a message that worked very well at one point was saying, you know what? This guidance is actually a very good news, because if you want to improve your health, if you want to improve your well-being, we have a very quick fix for you. Reduce the number of drinks you take every week, and suddenly you start feeling better. So we're not here with the bad news. We're actually with the good news, with something very good. And you can improve your sleep, you will have more energy and so on, and all that. And from that came this campaign that we launched in Canada, which was Drink Less, Live More. So we need to be better at giving people, as a united public health community, a very positive message.
Yeah. And I think all of those messages are embedded in the Dry January campaign in the UK, but also in the Hello Sunday Morning campaign in Australia, which, even just that phrase, Hello Sunday Morning, is really evocative. Sorry. Oh, yeah. I guess the other part is, when we come back to that decline in youth drinking, there's lots of things driving that, and I've done 4 years of research, and I could talk for quite a long time about it. But one of the things that's in play there is that young people are just interested in different lifestyles. And the kind of most evocative one of that is this idea of wellness. We talk a lot about advertising on the internet of alcohol, but we don't talk a lot about all the other advertising young people are seeing for wellness products, for different lifestyles that don't involve alcohol or in some way conflict with drinking. I think that's what's really worrying the alcohol industry at the moment, that there are a lot of ways of living being presented to people that just alcohol doesn't fit in very well with. And we can see that in the way that they're promoting alcohol-free drinks, is that they're trying to position their business to be able to speak to that. And we can have a debate about whether that's good or bad, because alcohol-free drinks are clearly much healthier. But yeah, there are really big changes going on at the moment.
Maybe I'd like to open the debate about standard drinks. We saw that they're used in most guidelines across the world. Across the world. They're not the same in every country. 8 grams per drink in the UK, 10 grams in France, and in many other countries, 13.45 grams per drink in Canada. And we also saw that this concept is not always totally understood by people. So how can we overcome that difficulty? What do you think?
Standard drink labeling on alcohol containers. People, especially now we see with the rise of, for example, the craft breweries, and you have all those fancy IPAs and Blanche and what have you, and they all have different alcohol content. Well, I have people in friends of mine, that are concerned about their health, and they would like, to reduce the number of drinks, but they open a can of beer and they have no idea how much alcohol standard drink there is in that. So you absolutely need, at the point of pour on your container, an indication of this beer contains 1.6 standard drinks or 1.2 or 1, what have you. But you need to know, because all too often it happens that people open something thinking they're having one drink. They're in fact having over 2 in a single serving. Of course, it's not perfect, on a bottle of wine, it will say, for example, 5 standard drinks, and how do you divide the bottle? It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than anything else. And people have the right to that information. Why would we not provide people with that information? Why would we not give it to them? They have the right to it.
I think the other strand here is, so we definitely want the standard drinks, or the units, as the UK and Ireland are the only people in the world who call them that, I think. We definitely want that on the products. But there's another part to that, which is, it's not just about people doing maths for themselves. There's some really nice research from Denmark on their food guidelines, where they said have basically 6 portions of fruit and veg a day. And what that showed is that people didn't really worry about the 6 number when it came into play. What they worried about was the fact that they have a number, that they have a sense that this is a mathematical thing that you can control. And then they use that to kind of set their own rules. So even where people aren't actually sticking to the guideline itself, or where they can't quite do the maths themselves, giving them the information, giving them the sense that here is a thing you can scale yourself against, leads people to actually start thinking in that way. The UK people will be familiar with the 5 a day campaign, and you can very clearly see how that's worked in the UK.
We also have some questions from the audience. If you can state your name as well.
I'm Helena as well, from Public Health Wales. I wanted to just make a comment, a question around the youth drinking, because it's a really interesting phenomena, and one probably quite challenging to some of our perceptions of who is most at risk of alcohol. But one thing I think is really clear is that this is not something that's come about through the efforts of public health, but has come about through changes in society. And I wonder what we can learn from that, from this phenomena, particularly reflecting on how we've done an awful lot of education around alcohol in schools, and that has not been the thing that's made a difference here. It's something else. So perhaps when we're thinking about guidance more generally for the population, what is it that's been the cultural change amongst young people that has been driven by young people that we can learn from and think about how we implement that for other, or try to implement for other parts of the population?
Excellent questions. Are there some more questions so that we can take another round? Yes. Lady here.
Thank you. Beatrice Lobby-Secretan from the IARC Handles program at IARC in Lyon. I want to go back to the idea of the standard drink and the unit. And I'm thinking, rather than say that, one drink is 1.6 units. I mean, the term of standard drink should define what people drink, what is the current standard. So we could, in a way, look at what today a current standard drink contains in terms of alcohol, and harmonize the amount of alcohol that contained in it, whether it's closer to 8 or closer to 13.45 in Canada. And then, based on that, adapt the number of drinks that one person would drink, a week or so, rather than saying in one serving of beer you have 1.3 units of alcohol. Then the math gets very complicated.
Indeed. Any other question? Yes. And also for our online participants, please type in your questions in the Q&A of the Zoom interface.
Thank you. My name is Laurette Boutin from the Standing Committee of European Doctors, ou le Comité Permanent des Médecins Européens. And my question, I think, is relating as well to the first one. Is there any evidence of specific campaigns that are maybe more effective for young people, or as well for adults or the elderly? Like, did you maybe analyze a type of video or a type of message which really resonates per age group? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And there for Mark, the final question, and then we go to the lists.
I think it's more of an observation on the guidelines question, but which is really interesting. And the discussion has been fantastic, and the presentations. Pierre mentioned, sorry, I should have said Mark Pettigrew, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Pierre mentioned earlier on that an alcohol industry NGO had said to you that we don't promote guidelines enough, which is a very interesting comment. And it reminds me that the alcohol industry is also interested in promoting guidelines. So we've done some analysis of alcohol industry messaging, particularly guidelines that don't mention the risk. So the alcohol industry will tweet, for example, that alcohol industry funded charities will tweet about guidelines, but not about breast cancer, not about fetal alcohol syndrome disorders and so on. So there is something, I think, goes back to what John said earlier about the individualistic nature of guidelines, and what Farron said earlier, and actually Catherine about isolating guidelines from the other types of interventions is really important. So it's just an observation, but I thought that was a really interesting comment, Pierre, and I wondered if you could say a bit more about that.
Okay, so yeah, 3 questions. One on the guidelines again, and the other one on age-sensitive campaigns, and particularly around young people, and the other comment on the standard drink.
This is easy to understand because if you have low drink guidelines, you say that drinking alcohol is okay. And the state is saying that. So it recognizes this industry, this commercial activities. So they welcome it very much.
To a certain extent, because I can promise you that in Canada, no alcohol industry funded organization has promoted the new guidance on that. They still all have the 2011 guidelines on their website, and none of them want to promote the new one.
Yes, you know why?
That's probably not a tenable. They definitely don't want to do it, and they didn't want to do it in the UK. But eventually, their position became untenable. They couldn't just keep having the old guidelines on when they weren't the guidelines.
How long did it take? Because it's been 2 years, and they still resist.
Well, it probably took about 3 or 4 years, didn't it, Mark? Something like that. But we are back now with roughly the same proportion of products, about 80% of products having the current guidelines on them. So you get there eventually. And there probably are some genuine reasons why it's slow to update packaging as well.
So why is it like this in UK and not in France?
I don't know the detail. I mean,
is it because there was a kind of collaboration between the Portman Group and etc. And they were on board?
I think this is the reality of there are lots of problems with industry working in partnership with government. One of the benefits is they have to do something, and this is a thing they will do. And so it has costs, obviously. They do this, which means they can argue we don't need to do these other things that would be more effective. But they do the thing they do, for want of a more articulate phrase. Emily's.
We have Emily, I think.
Yeah, I might just add to that. From the Australian experience, we have an industry-funded front body or a SAPRO here called DrinkWise, and they have voluntarily placed warning labels on alcohol containers for about 10 years now. Our research has shown that when a public health researchers develop warning labels, they're much more effective than the DrinkWise labels that appear on containers. We know the DrinkWise labels appear in very small on the back of the label. It can be very hard to find. But, it's pretty clear that it's had an impact in reducing political interest or kind of a sense of a need to be implementing stronger warning labels, because there's a sense that the industry is taking care of that. So I think it's a strategy we need to be very alert to and cautious about, and I'm sure you'll talk more about that this afternoon.
And the question about age sensitive, do you want to first respond to this, Mark, before we go to the age? Yeah, the age issue, indeed. I mean, do you recommend the guideline differently to young people or to older people, or how do you take the age factor into account?
I think this comes back to the debate we were having earlier about socioeconomic status and also about gender. Is which groups are you happy to tell to do different things? It's definitely the case that older people would probably get more benefit from drinking less to a greater extent than younger people. They're at much greater risk. Younger people, the risks are different. They're developmental risks. There's often more acute risks of violence, injuries, and so on. And you might have a different kind of guideline that focuses more on those kind of short-term harms that are more to do with intoxication. So it might be less about the guideline itself and more about the messaging and what it is you're trying to communicate to them. And that might be a way of sidestepping the issue of, do you give different guidelines altogether to different age groups, which I think would probably be one of the things to always avoid with this is, do you want to cause political controversy to get your message heard, but do you want to take the hit of the political controversy makes it harder to get things done? And yeah, different guidelines for different groups are going to play into that political controversy.
Mark, I think you had another question, maybe.
Thanks. It was just a comment on the point about what works with young people, and I wondered whether this is another area in which we can learn from tobacco control, because one of the things that does appear to work with young people, others can correct me, is informing young people about the activities of the industry. So the truth campaigns or the truth initiatives in the States have been very effective in smoking cessation among young people, because they haven't just told young people don't smoke, but they've told them about the manipulation practices. And I don't think we've done that in alcohol at all. There's been a bit of that in food. But anyway, it was. I just wondered if that was another way forward, which we haven't quite got to in alcohol, if we thought that was appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make a point in response to the question that was basically, it's not clear what we can necessarily learn in the big picture from the reasons young people are drinking less, because it's really to do with big concepts like neoliberalism and risk society and all those kind of complex macroeconomic ideas. But what you can do is ride the wave. And I think that's kind of what Mark is talking about, that young people are well disposed to hear these arguments about industry behaving in unacceptable or problematic ways. They believe in authenticity. They believe in bodily autonomy. They believe in their own health and the importance of health. And by tailoring public health messages that fit into that in the way that Mark just set out, we can start to really benefit from this slightly different disposition and we've got a trend that's come from outside public health. We can ride that trend and try and push it downwards. And as those young people move through their life course, once they get into the 40s and 50s, we may well really reap the benefits from that.
It is a real challenge in an era where it's sort of the triumph of individuality, everyone being unique and single and what about me, to come up with a global public health message. It certainly has its challenge. But as you say, there's a way of using that to our advantage. And with youth, for example, on campuses, in what we've been seeing is young people rallying around their peers who, for religious reason or personal reasons, decide not to drink, and saying, where do I fit into this? And suddenly their peers, even those who drink, saying, hey, we need to make sure that they are included, and therefore rallying around this public health message, because this way it promotes inclusivity of these people. And I always find fascinating this. There was this story that an administrator at a university in Florida once told me that the librarian called him and said, I just want to bring to your attention. She said, it's something weird happening. There's more and more people in the library all the time now. She said, late at night, Friday night, they're not doing anything wrong, but it's just a peculiar trend. And so this, I think it was VP Academic or Service to Students, went to the library and started talking with young people. Said, what are you all doing here? And they said, it's the only place on campus where there's no alcohol, where we can meet one another, have fun, discuss without the pressure of drinking. And so that led a whole reflection on campuses of making sure that there were places for those who choose not to drink, whatever the reason. So anyway, there's that could be the topic of a whole different panel. Yes.
Thank you, Catherine. We may arrive to our last question. I think, Gérard, you wanted to ask something. Can you introduce yourself, even if everybody knows you?
Gerard Hastings. I'm now a member of the SAB Advisory Council. I just wanted to follow up on something that Mark said about tobacco control. Learned that, particularly with young people, critiquing the industry can be quite powerful. And that led on to the whole concept, which I think was driven out of Canada, in fact, the idea of industry denormalization. Not alcohol denormalization, but industry denormalization. So you start to critique the industry and what they are doing. And in tobacco, that ended up in a place where it became impossible for government to work with the tobacco industry. They couldn't do that anymore. They were, and even right-wing governments would say, yeah, we'll talk to industry, but we don't talk to the tobacco industry. So there is mileage, I think, in just critiquing what is happening here. And I think it would also meet with the idea of moving beyond a specific topic of alcohol. This is what we're really touching on here, dare I say, is the problems of capitalism. And we're beginning to raise that broader perspective on what is happening here. It's not an accident that people are so encouraged to drink. There's something driving this. And starting that conversation, I think, is something that young people in particular might be interested in getting engaged in, but I value the views of the panel on all that. So the idea of industry denormalization.
Thanks a lot. This is a very good and important comment, and maybe also a comment and a debate that we will take in the next session after lunch, because there we will talk about industry and denormalizing industry. I think that's a very good, excellent suggestion. So if there are no further questions, then I would like to close this session. And thanks a lot to Emily, Catherine, Pierre, and John. And you as well.
Thank you,
see you as well later today. And we will now have lunchtime. And you have a bit more than an hour for lunch. And we would like to see you back here at 1:30. So enjoy your lunch. And thanks a lot.